together in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with Israel's retaliation against Iranian-backed Hezbollah. The Israeli military struck the Lebanese capital city of Beirut on Tuesday. Lebanon's state-run media reports at least one person was killed and more than 30 were injured. The strike targeted a Hezbollah military commander that Israel believes was behind a weekend rocket attack that killed 12 teens and children in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. Hezbollah denies any role in that attack. Shortly after Israel carried out the retaliatory strike, the country's defense minister tweeted, "Hezbollah crossed the red line." CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pata joins me now from Jerusalem. Deborah, what's the latest you're hearing about this strike?
Well, John, the Israel Defense Force announced just over an hour ago that it has eliminated Hezbollah commander Fuad Shakur, whom they say was responsible for the attack in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights that killed those 12 children. Spokesman Daniel Hagari says they will not tolerate attacks on Israeli civilians, and he said while Israel prefers not to have a wider war, they are prepared for any scenario. I should point out that at this stage, Hezbollah has not confirmed that Shakur is dead. And in fact, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has tweeted, "Your assassination failed." A U.S. official has told CBS News that Israel did give them a heads up before the strike, John, which happened around 7:45 p.m. this evening local time. And this is the second time that Israel has actually struck in Beirut since October the 7th. In January this year, it assassinated a senior Hezbollah leader. So both Israel and Hezbollah keep saying that they don't want this all-out war. But both sides really have steadily been ramping up their attacks. And this, of course, is the nightmare scenario that the U.S. and other leaders have been worried about all along. Interestingly, as you pointed out, Hezbollah has denied the attack, although the U.S. has said they have no doubt it was their rocket. But some Israeli analysts say that the village of Majd al-Shams, where the attack took place, may in fact not have been the intended target. But this is precisely what happens when you have missiles being lobbed over the border, where there are civilians on both sides. This kind of thing could happen. And of course, you know, Hezbollah is a far more formidable foe, Hamas, than Hamas is. And with their 150,000 missiles, they could wreak serious damage in this country. So it's a very worrying moment in this 10 months of strife here.
You were on the Israeli-Lebanese border, and to that point, what are people saying? How terrified are they about a possible escalation, whether by mistake or otherwise?
Well, people are terrified, John. You know, the attack took place in the Druze village of Majd al-Shams. This is an Arabic-speaking community that was actually part of the Golan Heights that was seized from Syria and then later annexed by Israel. And the Druze community largely refused Israeli citizenship. They've mostly been ignored by the current Israeli government. But as hostilities have ramped up in the border, they are clearly in Hezbollah's firing line and were devastated by the deaths of those 12 children, understandably, over the weekend when that rocket slammed into the soccer pitch. And in fact, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the attack site yesterday, there were protesters from the village calling him a war criminal and accusing him of using the dead bodies of their children to promote himself. They have said that they don't want revenge and they want the bloodshed to stop. But you have to remember that there are also a lot of other towns on the Israeli side where people are saying that they want this to end by Israel striking back. Those towns, many of whom have been evacuated, and there are displaced people on both sides of the border, both Israel and Hezbollah. I think there's a total of 150,000 people combined who have already been displaced. So we're talking about a conflict that's been at this low level for some time. And in Tel Aviv tonight, we're hearing family members of the hostages who are also very worried that with the focus on this possible all-out war, this could completely sideline, you know, the already slim hopes there are for some kind of deal for those hostages to be freed.
Deborah Pata with the latest and the complexities of that retaliatory strike from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Deborah. Now to Capitol Hill, where the Secret Service and FBI received more rough treatment Tuesday over agency failures before, during, and after the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump on July 13th. Senators on the Homeland Security and Judiciary Committees questioned Acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe and FBI Deputy Director Paul Abate about the communication and timeline leading up to the shooting. When asked by Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota what exactly went wrong, here's what Rowe had to say.
What I saw made me ashamed. This was a failure of imagination, a failure to imagine that we actually do live in a very dangerous world where people do actually want to do harm to our protectees. I think it was a failure to challenge our own assumptions. The assumptions that we know our partners are going to do everything they can. We didn't challenge that internally during that advance.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killion. Nicole, I got to stop at that failure of imagination assertion. Isn't the whole point of the Secret Service to imagine a world in which presidents and former presidents can get shot because presidents have been shot in the past? How did that go over?
Yeah, well, in terms of the acting Secret Service director, I mean, keep in mind the Secret Service has a no-fail mission, right? So he clearly acknowledged that in this case there was a major security lapse and failure that occurred. But in terms of that failure of assumptions, he referenced, he went on to say in the hearing that he thought, or the Secret Service thought, that local law enforcement had eyes on that roof. And so that was a mistake in his view, and he said going forward that they will make sure that they also have counter snipers that are also there with local law enforcement. So that was one kind of reference that he made. But the other, in terms of, to your point, he did talk about the Hinckley assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan, and said in that case, Hinckley was somebody who stalked former President Jimmy Carter for months before that assassination attempt happened against Reagan. And he said in this case, with respect to Thomas Crooks, he was a lone wolf. So also suggesting that perhaps they didn't see this coming.
And Nicole, Deputy FBI Director Abate revealed more information about the shooter's profile and so forth. What did we learn?
Well, he laid out a more detailed timeline of what happened, including the fact that local law enforcement did flag a suspicious individual who in turn happened to be Thomas Crooks well over an hour before the shooting actually occurred. And what happened to a certain extent is that there appeared to be some miscommunication, and the Secret Service director acknowledged that as well, saying, at no point did they know that Crooks had a gun or a weapon, and that they were having some issues with the radio communication, even though local law enforcement flagged that earlier in the afternoon in a text chain. And at one point, too, there was an instance where officers lost sight of the gunman a few minutes before the shooting actually occurred. So there were some missteps that both the FBI deputy director and the Secret Service director acknowledged, but it did shed more insight into that timeline and, in terms of potentially what may have transpired. But still, for a lot of lawmakers, a lot of questions about that timetable and why, again, the president was allowed to take the stage and why this event went so awfully wrong.
Nicole Killion on Capitol Hill. Thanks so much, Nicole.
You bet.
Now a warning for those of you who live in presidential battleground states. The TV ads are coming your way. Both the Trump and Harris campaigns have made their first big ad buys of the newly formed race. Former President Donald Trump is spending $12.2 million in 6 battleground states.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl. Brutal migrant crimes. And ISIS now here.
For her part, Harris placed a $50 million ad buy Tuesday, and she is expected to tour battleground states next week with her soon-to-be-announced running mate.
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. This campaign is about who we fight for. But Donald Trump wants to take our country backward, to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and end the Affordable Care Act. But we are not going back.
CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett joins me now to take a look at this race through these ad buys. All right, let's start with Vice President Harris. Major, what does the ad say to you about what the campaign's trying to do about Harris, and also what the priorities for that campaign are?
So national campaigns are about using your strength and responding to the perceived strength of your opponent. Look, former President Trump survived an assassination attempt. He has become iconic in that sense. And what did he say upon rising up from that event? Fight, 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 showing strength, resoluteness. Why does Kamala Harris's campaign talk about fearlessness? Because they want to counter, in their own way, that sense that she has internal strength and is also a fighter. But there is also something secondary about this, John, and the choice about fearlessness. Democrats, remember the 2016 campaign, did not regard Hillary Clinton as fearless up against former President Trump. They've regarded many other Democrats and other Republicans as cowering in the face of what comes from former President Trump, rhetorically and otherwise. And Democrats want to know, and maybe independents want to know as well, can Kamala Harris have the fearlessness required for the test of the mettle that is a national campaign? This ad is trying to answer that question.
Now to the Trump campaign's ads. The immigration ad is of the same flavor that they would have run against President Biden if he'd stayed in the race. So is that a strength of that ad campaign, or is that a possible weakness? Because they do have a new opponent who should be a target that maybe something outside of immigration.
Well, there will be targeting of Kamala Harris on other grounds. Trust me. There is going to be an entire ad war about defining who Kamala Harris is as vice president and in her previous life in politics. But on immigration, this is consistent. And what campaigns like to say is, when the message resonates, you don't back off it, even if circumstances change. One thing I would say, that campaign asserts that 10 million undocumented immigrants have crossed the border. The official number is 8 million, and that's not 8 million individuals. Many of those are counted multiple times because they're multiple border crossers. Why? Because they're caught, sent across the border, and they try again. That may be a distinction that doesn't matter that much, but it is important to lay on the table. What the Trump campaign believes, and what has been a persistent problem for the Biden-Harris administration, now it is a campaign led by Kamala Harris, immigration has vexed Republicans for sure, and increasingly independents. For the better part of 2 or 3 years, John, the Trump campaign believes, and there's reason for it to believe, this is a winning issue, and it will try to be aggressive about it continuously.
And so then, briefly, last question, Major, is what's the Harris campaign's retort on immigration, or is the retort to change the subject?
Partially to change the subject, to build out and reinforce Kamala Harris's biography as the Harris campaign wants it to be defined, continue to maintain that momentum that's been achieved in the last 2 weeks. Not an easy thing to do. But if there is an answer back on immigration, it is this, that as Vice President and President Biden supported a bipartisan deal that was entirely along Republican lines in terms of border security. None of the longstanding Democratic priorities in terms of comprehensive immigration reform. The person in politics in America who killed that deal was former President Trump. That's the answer back. That's where this will sit.
Major Garrett in Washington. Thank you so much, Major. Sure. Israel hits back at Hezbollah. Coming up, our MTS Tayyab is on the ground in Beirut as the Middle East fears a wider conflict. Plus, U.S. women's gymnastics always provides some kind of great Olympic story. Dana Jacobson reports from Paris on the latest chapter, and the U.S. men's gymnastics team has a great story, too. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep cleaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
It took less than 1 week for Northern California's Park Fire to burn more than 383,000 acres. This satellite video shows the fire's growth since it started last Wednesday. The flames and thick smoke have spread across 4 counties. The fire's 260-mile perimeter is about 30 miles more than the driving distance from Washington, D.C. to New York. Here's another comparison to put things in perspective. The 383,000 acres that the Park Fire has burned through is the equivalent to nearly half of the entire surface area of Rhode Island, which is approximately 777,000 acres. As of Tuesday evening, the fire was only 14% contained. CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti is on the ground in Chico, California, with a look at conditions. Jonathan, what do the emergency responders have to do to contain this fire to get past that 14%? How does that actually work?
Yeah, John, the work that CAL FIRE is doing has been incredible. So this has been mainly a wind-driven event. In the first few days of this fire, it quickly exploded. You had crews playing at that point defense, trying to hold back the flames. But in the past few days, the wind has subsided, giving these crews really for the first time the opportunity to play offense. We have been with crews throughout the day, starting very early this morning, as we watch them, hundreds of them, form a line and intentionally starting what are known as backfires, literally burning dry vegetation to prevent the main fire from continuing to grow. As you probably know, fire feeds off of dry vegetation. Without that vegetation, these mega fires can't explode. It has been incredibly effective. You mentioned 14% containment. It sounds small, but it's actually quite the advancement considering just 2 days ago, it was 0% contained. We expect crews to continue to do this throughout the day. Their main concern right now is tomorrow, triple-digit temperatures in the forecast, so they're trying to get out ahead of it. You have 5,000 people here on the front lines, focusing right now the northern tip of this fire, where it is continuing to grow. There have been some evacuations there. Fire crews telling us it could be several weeks before the flames are extinguished, John.
A double-barrel question, Jonathan. What's it like for these firefighters, that heat, working all the time? It just must be brutal. And then what have you heard from any of those who've had to be forced to evacuate?
Exhausting work for firefighters, John. That's why additional backup has been brought in, why you have that number ballooning from initially 1,000 to now 5,000 to give some of those firefighters some time off to recuperate. Evacuations, they've fluctuated over the past few days. At the height of this storm, we're talking about 10,000, but as those evacuation orders have been lifted because the fire has pushed through, like where we are here in Forest Ranch, you've had people return. We were actually in a neighborhood in Forest Ranch surveying some of the damage, and we met a man who was returning home for the first time only to discover that his home had been destroyed. The first thing he said was he had no idea how he was going to tell his 2 young children. We continued to talk. Later on in the conversation, he said something very striking to me. I asked him if he planned on rebuilding. It's a common question that people here get after a fire rips through, and he said his heart tells him yes, but his mind tells him no, and currently they're both having a conversation with one another. I had never heard it put that way before. It speaks to the angst so many people here in wildfire country feel. Climate change has fueled these mega fires. The top 7 largest fires here in the state, all happening in just the last 4 years, John.
Jonathan Vigliotti, it's great reporting. We're lucky to have you. Thank you, Jonathan, in Chico, California. The Park Fire is just one of many affecting California right now. The Nixon Fire in the southern part of the state has burned over 3,700 acres since it began Monday. It's at 0% containment. Evacuation orders have been issued in several parts of Riverside County, which is located about 58 miles east of Los Angeles. We're also following fires in other states. In Arizona, a massive brush fire has burned more than 23,000 acres near the Tonto National Forest. The Sandstone Fire was ignited by lightning last Friday. Emergency responders say they have made 0 progress in containing that fire. And in Loveland, Colorado, the Alexander Mountain Fire has burned nearly 2,000 acres of land. Firefighters were struggling to battle the flames as winds picked up to 20 miles an hour on Tuesday. Mandatory evacuation orders are in place for residents in the path of the fire. And it's not just the United States where things are burning. Wildfires are also burning in parts of Greece and the Balkans region. High temperatures and high winds are helping spread the flames. In Greece, 2 villages on the country's second largest island, Evia, have been evacuated as crews try to contain a fire there. Government officials warn things could get worse as August approaches. Experts say hot and dry summers connected to climate change have made wildfires more common in Greece. Data shows last year the country saw more than 8,000 fires. Tuesday marked a huge day for Team USA at the Paris Olympics. Simone Biles made a triumphant comeback after dropping out of the 2020 Games. This time, she competed on the beam, uneven bars, vault, and floor to bring, spoiler alert, the women's gymnastics team to gold. It's her 8th Olympics medal, making her the most decorated American gymnast. Teammates Suni Lee, Jade Carey, and Jordan Childs also delivered impressive performances. This was the 2,998 medal won by Team USA since the start of the modern games in 1896. It crossed the 3,000 mark in the evening, that is to say the U.S. did. For the record, the next most successful country no longer exists. According to the Olympic Foundation, the Soviet Union is in second place with just over 1,200 medals. Dana Jacobson joins us from Paris. She's the co-host of CBS Saturday Morning and a CBS News and Sports correspondent. Dana, let's start with Simone Biles and women's gymnastics. Just tell us the story.
I mean, John, you sort of said it with the numbers. Often numbers don't tell the story, but with Simone it does. I will say the emotion after Team USA captured the gold, it cut through a screen if you were watching. It was just incredible with these young women who, as you mentioned, back in Tokyo when Simone Biles wasn't with them, they took the silver instead of the gold. Now, 3 out of the last 4 Olympics, they're gold medalists. It's the 5th gold for Simone Biles. Her 38th Olympic or World Championship medal as the most decorated athlete. She's 27 years old, which is so young to us, but in Olympic terms, the oldest woman to qualify for an Olympic team since the 50s. It is incredible what she's doing, leading this young group of women and doing so with such strength and such poise. And it's what we saw in them tonight. And we get to see more of it later this week. She's going to get more medals. They're going to get more medals with the individual competitions coming up. I just don't think you can really express in words how impressive it is to dominate the way she does and do it with the poise that she does.
Yeah. Yes, an extraordinary act of mental and physical excellence. All right, the U.S. men's gymnastics also had a big victory. They won bronze after a 16-year drought. What are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think the women were inspiring for them. A group of young men who also had to pull together. You know, you think of gymnastics as this individual sport, but these are the team competitions, and it is doing it together. You know, they have one competitor who he's only on the pommel horse. That's it. That's the only thing he has, waiting all night to win that medal the other night to go forward in the pommel horse. They were at Team USA House tonight watching the women, and a really neat moment for them because the women's sport has grown so much. The men's sport, they were telling us, has taken a little bit of a hit, and they think this bronze medal could really do wonders for their sport.
Men's gymnastics has been a slowly dying sport in our country ever since the 80s. Especially with COVID, we lost a couple of very important NCAA programs, and I really hope that this moment sort of changes that path for men's gymnastics, especially because I've been seeing people reach out to me and say, I think that competition made me a gymnastics fan. So it's really nice to see the public really getting into our sport, digging into it, and enjoying what we do, and I hope that the athletic directors out there see that as well.
And the best thing that we've been hearing here about the Olympics and winning these medals, remember the last games under COVID still, everybody is around for these Olympians to celebrate, because we keep asking, like, who's the first person that you texted or called? And for all of them, it's no one. Everyone's here to celebrate, and that's pretty incredible, especially for those young men.
Yeah, the hugs after they win with the parents are hard to get through without getting emotional.
Yeah.
Now, the Seine. What's up with the dirty water?
I mean, that's hard to talk about without getting emotional because, you know, more than a century, you couldn't swim in it, contaminated. It is still contaminated right now is the problem. So they had to postpone the men's triathlon, which was set to take place today. The women's is set to take place tomorrow. So what they said is the women's will go and then the men's will go as long as the contamination levels are low enough and we can get people in the water. Big problem. It is supposed to rain overnight. We've got some lightning around in the area. Big storms expected. When it storms, the sewer water makes its way into the Seine, and that's why the contamination levels get higher. So the next date, if tomorrow doesn't happen, would be on Friday with both the men's and women's triathlon happening. If that doesn't happen, John, then they do what I think is the craziest thing I've ever heard. They get rid of the swim portion, and it becomes a duathlon. I mean, seems crazy, but that is the rule. That's what will happen. We'll have to keep watching. And then next week, we've got the marathon swimming. That's also in the Seine at the end of the week. They do have a backup plan for that as far as another location where they can do that.
Adapt and overcome. Dana Jacobson in Paris.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dana. Can't wait to talk to you again. Coming up, there's growing unrest in Venezuela over a presidential election that has thousands of people and some international groups questioning the legitimacy of the results. We'll get an update on the ground there. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. Top Secret Service and FBI officials faced harsh questioning on Capitol Hill Tuesday at a Senate hearing concerning the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Secret Service Acting Director Ronald Rowe said the agency was ultimately responsible and he was, quote, ashamed. Facebook parent company Meta has agreed to settle a privacy lawsuit in Texas for $1.4 billion. The case alleged Meta used biometric data of users without their permission. Meta shut down its facial recognition system in 2021, saying it would delete the face prints of more than 1 billion people. More than 100 people are dead after a series of landslides in southern India. The terrain and isolation of some affected villages are making rescue efforts more difficult. The death toll is expected to rise as operations continue. As we reported earlier, Israel launched a strike against Hezbollah Tuesday in Lebanon's capital city of Beirut. The Israeli military says the strike was in response to a weekend attack that killed 12 children and teenagers in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayeb is at the scene in Beirut. Imtiaz?
Well, you might be able to see just over my shoulder, just through there, is one of the buildings that were damaged in that Israeli strike, which we believe targeted a very senior Hezbollah commander. And it really has created a scene of absolute chaos here in Dahya, which is a suburb in southern Beirut, often described as a Hezbollah stronghold. Now, we know that for days now, the U.S. and other Western governments have been pressuring Israel not to target densely populated areas like this, and now this is what we've seen. Now the situation here is really just unfolding. We're still getting information as it stands, but Hezbollah will have to respond to this, and that is the fear, that what happened here tonight will lead to a response from Hezbollah, and we will see a tit-for-tat between Israel and Hezbollah in the way that we've seen for many months now that could lead to an all-out war, and that is something nobody wants. John.
Imtiaz Tayeb in Beirut. Thank you. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Singapore as part of his 10-day-long tour of Asia. His meetings there will focus largely on the growing climate and technology sector in Singapore. Earlier Tuesday, Blinken was in the Philippines. The island nation's close proximity to Taiwan makes it a key security ally to deter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. After meetings in Manila, Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who is also in the region, announced plans to commit $500 million in U.S. defense aid to modernize the Philippines military and Coast Guard. Thousands of people across Venezuela have taken to the streets to protest President Nicolas Maduro's disputed election victory. Maduro's loyalists on the National Electoral Council declared him the winner of the weekend election, despite claims from the opposition that the real vote tally tells a different story. Officials in the U.S. have joined a number of other countries calling for transparency and the release of the voting results. Venezuela's main opposition leaders led a march in Caracas Tuesday. Most of the demonstrations have remained peaceful, with some exceptions. A local human rights watchdog, Foro Penal, says at least 6 people have been killed and more than 130 protesters arrested. CBS News has not been able to independently verify those numbers. For more on the protests, we go to Lilia Luciano, who is in Caracas. Lilia?
John, good evening. Here in Caracas, across Venezuela and around the world, not just the tension is it going up, but also the rhetoric. There have been clashes on the streets. Today, there were mass manifestations, peaceful at first, in support of the opposition. People who say they believe and they trust that opposition leader Maria Corina Machado and who they believe is the president-elect Edmundo González Urrutia, in fact, are telling the truth, are showing the evidence, are proving that he was victorious, that he won the election, while the government of Nicolás Maduro maintains that they won, but still won't show the evidence, still won't reveal the voting tallies, the official results, and that's what the international community is demanding from them. But just as the heat is going up in the streets, so is the rhetoric. Today, the opposition is demanding and saying, show us the proof, and then the government, the president, has been saying there has been a coup, there has been an attempt to take down my government by force. They're talking about violence that has been spreading across the streets of Venezuela, but they're also the head of the National Assembly accusing the opposition of violence, of deaths. This has happened in the past, and the opposition leaders who had been pointed to as starting the violence, as instigating violence, ended up in prison or in exile, and in some cases a combination of both. Today, the leadership, the president of the National Assembly, called for Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo González Urrutia to be arrested. So we can only expect that, although now the protests have died down because there was heavy rain, the tension, the heat, the clashes will pick back up in the coming hours. John.
Lilia Luciano in Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you. Joaquin Guzman Lopez, the son of convicted drug cartel leader El Chapo Guzman, pled not guilty Tuesday in an American court. Guzman Lopez was indicted in 2023 on drug trafficking and money laundering charges. He and 3 of his brothers are accused of taking over as the leaders of their father's cartel after their father was extradited to the United States in 2017. Guzman Lopez and his father's alleged co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel were arrested last Thursday in Texas. He has also pleaded not guilty to similar charges. U.S. national debt has surpassed $35 trillion for the first time. So why aren't we hearing about it that much on the campaign trail? And what questions should we be asking the presidential candidates about how to manage the burden? You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party? Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
There was once a time, not that long ago, when the size of the national debt dominated political conversation. In 1992, when Ross Perot ran for president on that issue alone, the debt was about $4 trillion. It has now surpassed $35 trillion. It hit that number for the first time on Monday and equates to over $104,000 per person. Financial hole is mounting quicker than most economists had predicted. That's because the money spent on federal programs recently has gone over their initial projections. David Wessel now joins me to talk about this. David is a senior fellow in economic studies at Brookings, and he's the director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy. David, it's good to be with you again. Help people understand what this gargantuan number means and why, whether it's dangerous and why it is, if it's dangerous.
Well, I think a better way to look at it than just the numbers, we've had a lot of inflation since the early 90s, is to compare it to the size of the economy. And today, the federal debt is about 100% of the GDP. And that's roughly where it was at the end of World War II. We've never been here before. So far, it's not a problem. The problem is that it's going to continue to rise. The Congressional Budget Office says it'll be about 122% of GDP in 10 years, and it'll keep rising from there. So the problem is you can't grow your debt forever faster than your income, and that's what we're doing. And we're doing it for a couple of reasons, largely because we're an aging society, so more and more money goes to older people, and because healthcare costs, half of which are paid by the federal government, are rising faster than everything else. And taxes are not projected under current tax law to rise fast enough to close the gap. And that's basically the problem.
And when you say the money is going to older people, that's essentially in outlays to Social Security and Medicare?
Correct.
And defense spending is another thing that when you just think about how to fix this, it's also another large part of the pie.
Right, but when you look at these look, I'm not really worried today about the economic damage that the debt is doing. We have a very strong economy. There's no sign that businesses are having trouble lending money. Interest rates are not that high and they're on the way down. So those are signs, and every other country wants to buy US Treasury bonds. The Treasury's not having any trouble borrowing the money. The problem is not today. The problem is tomorrow, and it's going to keep rising. But when the Congressional Budget Office does these forecasts, they don't assume a big increase in defense spending or a big increase in the money we spend on national parks or anything. What's really driving it is the entitlement programs and the fact that taxes are not rising as fast as the spending on entitlement programs. That's the problem.
and is essentially the reason this isn't much talked about in the political sphere the way it used to be. Both the first point you made, which is that it's not disrupting the economy as we experience it right now, and those choices on the big growing parts of the drivers of debt are hard political choices.
Absolutely. So you hear members of Congress say, oh my God, the debt's too big. And then they say, but we don't want to touch Social Security, we won't want to touch Medicare, and we don't want to raise taxes. Well, when you take all those things off the table, you don't have much to talk about. And that's the political dilemma. So why should we worry about this? And I think there are a couple reasons. One is we managed to borrow a lot of money to fight the COVID, to help out during the Great Recession and to fight the COVID downturn in the economy. We can't be sure that we can borrow another big chunk of money if we have another big problem, a terrorism attack, another pandemic, a war or something. We're running out of what economists call fiscal space. We don't know what the limit is. Secondly, we could have a crisis someday. Now, one reason that people aren't talking about this as much as they did in the 90s, John, you may remember, in the 90s, the crisis was always said to be just around the corner. Bob Rubin, the Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton, said that. The Simpson-Bowles Commission says just any day now we're going to have a crisis. People won't buy our bonds. Well, the crisis never arrived. And so that sort of defanged the notion that if we don't do something, it's going to be catastrophic. The bigger problem, it seems to me, is eventually two things will happen. One is more and more of our federal spending will be eaten up by interest, half of which goes to foreigners, which means less money for everything else. And eventually it will crowd out private borrowing. That will slow economic growth, productivity growth, and that'll mean lower living standards in the future. We might not ever have a crisis. This might be like just smoking one more cigarette. The next cigarette won't kill you, but eventually, if you keep smoking, it will.
David Wessel with the Brookings Institution. That was great, David. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Still to come, a rocket launch with a secretive payload marks the end of an era for the U.S. military. We'll explore what's next. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now, we got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Three, 2, 1. We have ignition.
That was the moment a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket lifted off from Florida's Cape Canaveral. It carried a secret payload for the U.S. Space Force into orbit for a national security mission. Tuesday's launch also marked the 100th national security mission carried out by the ULA. CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood joins me now for more. Bill, the Atlas V launched its last national security mission on Tuesday. The builder, United Launch Alliance, already has retired its Delta IV family of rockets and is flying out the remaining inventory. How's that all going, that process?
Well, it's going very well, John. You know, as you saw, the Atlas V chalked up another flawless flight today. They have 15 more of these rockets in the inventory. 6 of them are going to be used to carry Boeing Starliner spacecraft up to the space station through the end of the station's life. And the others are launching the Kuiper internet satellites, you know, the Amazon version of Starlink that SpaceX is launching. Those are going to start flying pretty soon. And so the Atlas has a full schedule. Now, what the company, United Launch Alliance, is doing is they're transitioning to a brand new rocket called the Vulcan that really combines all the good points of the Deltas and the Atlases, but it costs less. It's very powerful. And that's the rocket that United Launch Alliance sees as their future with these big national security payloads and commercial payloads as well. So all of that's proceeding. The Vulcan had their first test flight back in January. They have another one coming up here in a couple of months, and then they're going to be certified to carry military payloads, and that'll get going hopefully next year.
So you mentioned the Starliner. What's the latest on the Boeing Starliner?
Well, as you know, they've been up there way longer than the 8 to 10 days they originally planned, virtually almost 2 months by now, because they had some thruster issues. And as you know, they had helium leaks that they weren't expecting once they were rendezvousing with the space station. They just recently test fired all the thrusters. They all worked perfectly. The known helium leaks, they haven't gotten any worse, and they have more than enough helium to get back to Earth. The helium is what pressurizes their propulsion system. So I think they're increasingly confident that they can safely bring home the commander, Butch Wilmore, and his co-pilot, Sonny Williams. We would expect that probably in early August. There's a big meeting at the end of this week to discuss all that, see where things stand, and to get some consensus on what to do next. But I'm increasingly pretty confident they're going to come home on the Starliner, and I think everything will be just fine.
Quite a layover for them. NASA also launches astronauts on the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsules atop Falcon 9 rockets. They had a recent launch failure. What caused that failure, and will NASA be able to launch its next space station crew on a Falcon 9 on August 8th, as they originally had planned?
Yeah, that flight, August 18th, John, is when they were targeting that mission. You're right. The failure they had back on July 11th was an oxygen leak, a liquid oxygen leak, in the engine plumbing of the Falcon 9's second stage. SpaceX implemented a quick investigation. The Federal Aviation Administration and NASA participated in that, and I think they're good to go. They resumed flights this past weekend with 3 flawless missions.
Bill Harwood, always a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much, Bill.
My pleasure.
In the lazy days of summer, those stuck inside on a rainy day or those anxious to look busy while avoiding visiting relatives resort to the slow pace of putting together a jigsaw puzzle. None of these kinds of people will be found in Spain this September. That's when more than 3,000 puzzle enthusiasts from around the world compete to see who can piece it all together the quickest. That includes reigning world champion Alejandro Clemente Leon of Spain, who won last year's contest by completing a 500-piece jigsaw in under 38 minutes. According to the competition's founder, the most common puzzle techniques include organizing the pieces by color or pattern and starting with the puzzle's borders first. That was Mom's advice, too. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Israel strikes Lebanon in retaliation for a deadly rocket attack over the weekend. What the move means for tensions in the Middle East. Plus, the Secret Service faces some very public questioning. A report from Capitol Hill after Tuesday's tense Senate hearing. And Team USA shines in Paris with the women's gymnastics team bringing home the gold. We'll have a recap of the day's Olympic highlights. You're streaming CBS News.